Do you remember the story about the boy that almost drowned in the pool? That was me they were talking about. I almost died. That was me. I'm not lying, okay? I just didn't remember it, that's
Joseph,
all.
You know your father was injured in college. You know that. You know all about that. Don't do it. He'll die, Joseph.
I'll just shoot him once.
Joseph, listen to what your mother...
When you hear the word film or movie, what first comes to mind? Entertainment? Interest? Experience? An escape from reality? There are many different ideas that can spawn from the world of film. Ever since I first began experiencing complex films, I have looked more closely at film as well as other things in life.
Hello, Daddy.
As this video continues on, I would like for you to ask yourself, what does film mean to me? How can I use what I see in film in my own life? And is film important? Is it important for the industry? For us? For our daily lives? Is film evolving? How and why? And my main question, is complex film influencing evolution in various industries through unique practices and unparalleled products?
I'd do anything for him.
Over the past decade, complex films as well as complex puzzle films have been gaining more and more traction and popularity in the entertainment industry.
Let's take a look inside.
The purpose of this video will be to teach the viewers about complex film and persuade them that complex films are evolving the industry as well as others. I want to look at what makes these movies tick, what makes them stand out to people, and how this, in turn, influences positive evolution in the film industry.
A person put here to protect the rest of us, to guard us.
So here's my thesis. Complex films, such as Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, and complex puzzle films such as Christopher Nolan's Memento, help to evolve the film industry, as well as other industries, through their unique narratives, multi-dimensional scenes, out-of-the-box thinking, multi-layered characters, and branching stories, because these elements add additional ways for audiences to consume the entertainment, interact with that content, perceive it in their own way, and discuss similarities as well as differences with others for an overall positive and one-of-a-kind experience.
You're not safe here. They're coming for you.
Now, before we get into complex films themselves, let's first take a look at what the terms complex film and complex puzzle film really mean. Basically, complex films are films that use unconventional practices and they play around with different elements that we as an audience are used to seeing, just not in different ways. These films don't follow the road of a more classical approach. Some factors that complex films play around with are time and what is real versus what is imagination. I call this idea audience deception, where the directors keep the audience blind to something like a film's narrative twist. A good example of this would be M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, where child psychologist Dr. Malcolm Crowe, played by Bruce Willis, suddenly realizes that at the end of the film, he's dead. And this is what makes the film so interesting to view a second time, and actually see that the character never interacted with anyone else besides young Cole Sear, played by Haley Joel Osment, the kid who sees dead people.
They talk to you? They tell you to do things?
They're the ones that used to hurt me.
Now, for complex puzzle films, they're similar to complex films. They're just more puzzle-like. And this usually occurs when multiple stories are playing out in a single film, because it then turns into more of a puzzle that the viewer has to analyze and solve themselves.
Everybody be cool, this is a robbery!
In Warren Buckland's puzzle films Complex Storytelling in Contemporary Cinema, he states the puzzle plot is, I would argue, the third type of plot that comes after the complex plot. A puzzle plot is intricate in the sense that the arrangement of events is not just complex, but complicated and perplexing. The events are not simply interwoven, but entangled.
But somehow I just know she's never gonna come back to bed.
When it comes to film, how I interpreted it is that complex films have extra content, extra layers for audiences to peel back and learn themselves as they watch, while simpler films practically just feed the audience all that they need to know with not much extra to offer them in terms of flavor, character development, and story. So this brings me to my first claim. Conversion from complex to simple loses detail, uniqueness, and personality.
This is a tasty burger.
When you go from something that's complicated over to something that's more plain and basic, you lose these factors and elements that made that thing engaging in the first place. Less detail means that there's less to learn about and less to understand. And for a product, losing that personality can be detrimental to the product's success, because now it doesn't have a memorable face and it's no longer going to stick out to people. This problem is extremely prevalent for things like businesses nowadays. Businesses want their name to be heard and remembered. They want their products to jump out at people. They want to be recognized. And it's obvious that adding complexity will bring uniqueness and personality to the table, and this will aid in their lifelong quest to get out there more.
When I looked into his eyes, I thought I saw recognition. Now I know you fake it. If you think you're supposed to recognize somebody, you just pretend to. You bluff it to get a pat on the head from the doctors. You bluff it to seem less of a freak.
Now, if you were to take this concept and apply it strictly to film, you'll notice that films that had more complexity than simplicity will stick in people's minds longer and make them remember it and remember certain scenes and particular moments in that movie. If we go back to Warren Buckland's book again, Puzzle Films, Complex Storytelling in Contemporary Cinema, he argues that when something complex is transformed and converted into something more simple, crucial details that added to the unique feeling of that thing are then lost, and the potential for extra enjoyment and additional appreciation for that thing fades out of existence. More complexity builds more unique personality, and more simplicity cuts down on that beautiful personality.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
Imagine if the author of a book removed several important adjectives that added detail to what specific objects in a scene looked like, or deleted little hints as to what a certain character was feeling in a particular moment. The content there loses depth and identity and just gets lost on people. And if you went even deeper into film and went strictly to characters, simple characters and complex characters can have the same amount of factors or elements to them, but with simple characters, they'll have those factors in them point in a predictable direction, while the complex characters have those factors in them pointing in all different directions, surprising the audience and keeping them on their toes.
Guess what name came up? John Edward Gamble, John G.
Keeping audiences interested in a piece of work is extremely crucial to something's success. An amazing man known as Stan Lee once said, "If you have an idea that you genuinely think is good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it."
You have good instincts for things like that?
Like what?
Knowing when people have done something wrong.
When it comes to film, complex filmmakers have to go deep into their creative minds for new, innovative ideas and make sure that these concepts aren't limited in any way by other companies involved, because more creative freedom is then capitalized on. So my next claim is this: complex films allow creators to think more freely and creatively without limitations.
Little emotion.
In Stuart Joy's and Jacqueline Furby's book, The Cinema of Christopher Nolan, Imagining the Impossible, the authors point to an interview with Christopher Nolan. He was asked about his unusual approach to narrative, after he was debuting one of his first hit films, Insomnia. Nolan replied with, "I wasn't a very good student, but one thing I did get from it was that I started thinking about the narrative freedoms that authors had enjoyed for centuries."
Remember, you are the dreamer. You build this world. I am the subject. My mind populates it.
A lot of complex films will usually first form from allowing the creators and directors behind the project itself to think in their own creative ways and make what they want to make, not because they need to for a paycheck, but because they actually want to. It seemed like a lot of the time in the past, big production companies didn't want to take these kinds of risks. And so they would only go with what was popular and what would make them the most money and what would reach the most people. But now, big creative and influential minds in the film industry, such as Christopher Nolan and M. Night Shyamalan, have since changed this whole idea around with the massive success of their films. For Christopher Nolan, this happy accident would change his career as a director forever and lead him on to help put together and direct a series of Batman films, earning over $2 billion in box office returns for Warner Bros. Entertainment.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got them? Come here. Hey. Look at me.
To tie off this idea of free thinking, the absolute potential of it in other industries other than just film can definitely be seen and understood, and it just goes to show how these healthy and successful practices with free thinking in complex filmmaking allow for such active evolution in the industry. In doing this, more ideas will be able to surface, more unique products will be developed, and more competition will come of it in the end.
I'm just ahead of the curve.
Now, it's finally time for a nice, detailed look at Christopher Nolan's Memento. This film was one of the first films of its kind, a true puzzle film. It brought genuine innovation with new concepts and ideas that few films had ever done before, with great success. And so my third claim. Christopher Nolan's Memento shows innovation as well as capitalization in what films can do. The innovation being that there was innovation in the concept of time with its main story played in reverse, there was innovation in the concept of truth, doubt, and lie with its clashing objective and subjective perspectives, and there was narrative innovation with its different narrative strands. And for the capitalization, it is true that films in the past, before Memento released, did use ideas that Memento adopted, but this just shows that Memento did a really good job taking those ideas and capitalizing on them and evolving their concepts and also putting them on a widespread level in the film industry.
You put these together and you get the feel of a person.
In Matthew Campora's subjective realist cinema, From Expressionism to Inception, he points to and analyzes three distinctive hooks that the film Memento had. The first being that the main storyline was chopped up and played in reverse order. This was an extremely clever way to simulate the crucial loss of memory that the main character Leonard was suffering from, while secondary storylines, or flashbacks, were played in linear order. The film's second hook was that it had its whole story split up into 4 distinct narrative strands. These different strands would act as gateways into separate portions of Leonard's life, or his supposed one. The third hook was that the film had this sort of untrustworthy quality to it at times. Since most of the film is seen from Leonard's perspective, not everything the audience would see at certain times could be perceived as true or real due to his condition.
What drug dealer?
In an interesting interview, Christopher Nolan discussed how the colorized scenes played in reverse order are put in a subjective point of view within Leonard's head, while the black and white scenes played in linear order are put in a more objective point of view outside of Leonard's head. This can be noticed through somewhat subtle video and audio cues, because Leonard is seen farther away from the camera than usual, and the voices he hears on the phone cannot be heard by the audience. It is not until later on in the film that the audience begins to question Leonard, his thoughts, his actions, and his reasoning.
Do I lie to myself to be happy? In your case, Teddy, yes, I will.
A film sort of similar to this is Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, because the story's timeline is also chopped up and switched around, but Tarantino likes to mix it up even more by not just throwing everything in reverse order, but throwing everything everywhere, and Pulp Fiction gained a lot of popularity because of this interesting approach to time in film. The complexity of the film not only makes it unique and influence evolution in the industry, but it also pulls in the audience, makes them think about what they're actually watching, and pushes them to question the film's real meanings behind the consequences.
Quickly, gentlemen. We've got about 15 minutes before Jimmy's better half comes pulling into the driveway.
A good way of displaying the true appreciation and care that audience members can have for these types of films is the massive amounts of online forums and posts on these films. These films can provide viewers with different viewpoints and different outcomes in the film's stories. So now for my fourth claim. Audience engagement increases with more complex films because there is more occurring in the film that must be perceived, comprehended, and put together. The specific example I will use here is Christopher Nolan's Memento, and how it had an incredibly positive online presence, which in turn helped in marketing the film to other audiences. This was an interesting sign of evolution for film and the exposure of film at the time.
I helped you find him over a year ago. He's already dead.
Don't lie to me anymore.
In Claire Malloy's book titled Memento, she stated that online forums began to buzz with discussion about the film Memento, and debates continued for many months as hypotheses about various aspects of the film multiplied. She later went on to say that online word of mouth, or WOM networks, are considered to be more trustworthy and credible than formal marketing because the content displayed and discussed is independent of the market and therefore less prone to bias. One final thing that Malloy mentioned was that Memento had a limited budget for its marketing efforts, but the online WOM networks proved worthwhile and effective. The effectiveness can be supported by the film's suggested box office returns.
No, he's chasing me.
Certain trends can be found in box office earnings, especially for franchises. If we looked at the Batman franchise, you can see that Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns did exceptionally well upon release, both receiving above average ratings and making a combined total of more than $675 million in box office returns. On the other hand, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin did horribly, receiving laughable ratings. Really? But still earning a total of almost $575 million in box office earnings, most likely due to the high anticipation coming off the backs of the previous films in the franchise. Then, as discussed before, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy obtained extremely high ratings and secured a whopping $2.4 billion in box office returns.
Bus driver. What bus driver?
So what does this all mean? Well, for my fifth claim, I'm saying that box office earnings for certain sets of films display how the more complex ones are often more popular and earn more money when compared to the less complex ones. My best example for complex films and how they're more successful than simpler films is the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the box office earnings for these films.
I hope they remember you.
Marvel Studios' Avengers Infinity War, which earned $2.048 billion, blew other superhero films out of the water because the filmmakers and actors just threw so much passion and so much content together into one movie, and they still made sure that everything worked consistently.
Eyes up.
On the other hand, DC Films attempted to create and accomplish something similar with their Justice League movie, which earned only $657.9 million. The movie ultimately failed upon release due to the poor lack of consideration for consistency and attention to detail by the filmmakers. Another possible reason for the film's failure could be that the higher-ups in DC Films did not give the filmmakers all of the tools and space that they needed to make the movie into what they wanted it to be.
How many of you are there? Not enough.
If you looked at the top Marvel Cinematic Universe movies in terms of box office ratings, you would see the 3 current Avengers films up there, because they are more complex in terms of movie runtime, amount of characters, depth of character, hidden messages, tension, consequence, and fear of loss. There's just all these different stories playing out at once, and most people will say that they find this style of film more engaging and enjoyable to watch because they get to see all of their favorite characters and all of their favorite stories connect, intertwine, and interact.
Oh, by the way, this is a friend of mine, Tree.
I am Groot!
With every argument comes a counter argument, and there's definitely a few that you could have with this one. I'll quickly go over one that comes to mind immediately, and that's that some people just don't like complex films. They'd rather watch something that's simpler, something that they can turn their mind off while they're watching it and just enjoy what they're watching without having to think too much about what they're seeing. And this is completely understandable. Some people like watching movies over and over and over in order to better understand the characters and the stories that are happening in the movie, while others absolutely hate watching movies over and over and over again in order to better understand what's happening. They want to be able to get it on the first go. But with complex puzzle films and complex films in general, that is probably not going to happen 100%.
Is that what I think it is? Mm-hmm.
Alright, so in conclusion, complex films will always have an extra special place in my heart because of their interesting and different qualities. And after showing you all of the different ideas that complex films can achieve and how successful they can be in comparison to simpler movies, I hope you can agree with me in saying that complex films do help in influencing evolution in the film industry, as well as other industries, because they do try their best to adopt new practices and develop innovative ways of connecting people to not only another reality, but also to the people around them. And that's something that's kind of special.